Silverman, co-director of the Mythic Mississippi Project. I'm pleased to share with you this speech by Cecil Roberts, President of the United Mine Workers of America. He presented this speech a couple of years ago in Mount Olive for May Day 2018. And obviously, Mount Olive is the burial place of Mother Jones and also the hometown of General Bradley. This is the significance of Mount Olive and why he spoke there. We've edited out some of his opening remarks of acknowledgement and a few other side comments so that the viewer focuses on the message of the speech. Mr. Roberts gave a rousing defense of his union and unionism. It's a fascinating discourse and one that should be listened to carefully in the context of current American politics. Mr. Roberts' speech can be understood by anyone, with the exception of one reference he makes and emphasizes, and that I didn't know. So I'm telling you because not all of you may be familiar with it. He speaks about Pittston, Pittston, and he's referring to the 1989 Pittston coal strike in Southwest Virginia. And this was a battle for workers' rights, particularly over health care and pensions. I also would like to thank Gordon Heyman, who filmed this video of Mr. Roberts and made it available to the Mythic Mississippi Project with the permission of Mr. Roberts, who wants it to be widely disseminated. Mr. Heyman himself is a member of the board of the Real Mother Jones Museum in Mount Olive, and he's a member of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, which is a labor union of over 140,000 members, and thus he's a strong advocate of unions. Here is Mr. Cecil Roberts' speech. Thank you.
I want to take a moment and say how much I appreciate the work that both the cemetery officers and committees do to keep the cemetery in the public's eye, to make sure our history continues forward, and the hard work that this museum does to capture our past, because we have a proud history in the United Mine Workers and a proud history of who we are and the blood of people like Mother Jones and John L. Lewis and John Mythic and all those who fought at the Battle of Verdun and Ludlow and Paint Creek and Cabin Creek is flowing right now through our veins. So we should be really proud of who we are, and I know that you are. But please give a round of applause to the folks who worked so hard to see that happen. But let me just say this. I, once again, want to thank everybody that came to the cemetery, that came here today. I am so overwhelmed by that. I am going to tell everybody about this, and I'm going to have the pictures to prove it, because they're going to say, "How you're stretching the truth." There weren't that many people out there at that cemetery. But I think not only am I pleased about that, and I'm happy about that, something tells me that Mother Jones was looking down upon us and said, there's working people out there still willing to fight for what's right and to recognize those who did fight, and you're ready to continue on in that proud tradition and to stand up for what you have earned by working in the coal mines or the steel mills. And we're just as strong and just as good as any rich person out there on Wall Street who thinks they run this country. It's about time we actually took our country back. I want to get to make a few points, if I might. You know, Mother Jones first showed up where I lived way before I was born. miners on Paint Creek went on strike in 1912. They were already in the union, and they were striking for a contract. The miners on Cabin Creek were non-union, so they saw the miners on Paint Creek striking, and they said, well, this is a good time for us to strike for recognition. By the way, we complain about the labor laws today. There were no labor laws back in 1912. It's whoever was the toughest and who could withstand the most, and maybe sometimes who was the best shot, that's who won those battles in those days. So you had all these miners, and by the way, it was very labor intensive. It was hand loading. There was 6,000 people on strike. Can you imagine? About 2 haulers. Cabin Creek's 15 miles long, and Paint Creek's a lot longer than that, but the mining on Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, they produced 6,000 people on strike. Well, the coal companies didn't like the fact that we went on strike, as you can imagine, and they retaliated. The first thing they did, they hired the Baldwin Phelps thugs out of Bluefield, West Virginia, the famous Phelps brothers, and they sent them in to Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, and the first thing they did was start mounting machine guns and building pillboxes like in World War I all around their properties, and they meant to kill people that tried to come on their property or try to break or try to stop them from mining coal. The next thing they did, they created a train they called the Bull Moose Special, and that train had an armored car on it, and they mounted a machine gun on that. Then they went to all the miners' homes and they evicted them. So not only were they jobless, they were homeless the day they went on strike, and a lot of people kind of missed that. So you're jobless and homeless the same day, and no one around this place has ever gone on strike and become homeless the day you strike. So then they took the train up the hollers, and they took all of the furniture that belonged to these coal miners, and they loaded it on the train. And they took that, on Cabin Creek, they stopped at Estill. My great-grandmother owned property at Estill, 15 miles long, and only one place that wasn't owned by the coal operator, that was Estill. And they called Estill the Free State of Estill in those days because they weren't controlled by the coal industry, right? So Mother Blizzard gave them a right to put their tents on her property. But the problem you have here is one that's very obvious. There was no strike benefits in those days. The only thing that the union did was give them a tent. So now they're living in tents on Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, and every once in a while, here comes the Bull Moose Special up the road shooting at the tents, just for sport, right? This strike goes on and on and on, and then Mother Jones shows up. Now, when I quote Mother Jones, you've got to forgive me, because you cannot quote Mother Jones without cursing. Now, I can say blank, 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 and blank, 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 and you won't know what I'm talking about. So she goes up Cabin Creek, and they won't let her walk on the road. They, to be in the co-operators, they let her get in the creek. They said, that road belongs to us. So get in the creek, Mother Jones. And so they called that walking the creek, and she's walking the creek to try to get up and to Estill to see the strikers on Cabin Creek, and she does the same thing at Paint Creek. And the next thing she does is, we need a rally here. Now, we've got lots of rallies in the mine workers here since 2013, haven't we? So she's at the mouth of Cabin Creek, and she's standing on a stump, and there are 6,000 people listening to her. No PA system. Now, you know what I think about that? There was 5,800 people didn't hear a word she said. Only about 200 could hear her. And that's one of the places stump speeches, I guess, came from, because she'd get up on a stump that somebody cut the tree down so people could see her in the back. And she said this to the striking miners: you're all a bunch of cowards. She said, y'all let the women run this strike. And chastised them to no end. Now, she was pretty good at that, you know. And so she says, now, if you want to win this strike, go up Paint Creek and Cabin Creek and arm yourselves. And you kill every one of them son of a bitches. Then you burn their temples down and their plants, and you'll win this strike. And guess what? They did exactly that. And it became a shooting. It called it mine wars then. It wasn't a strike. It became a mine war of coal miners and these thugs shooting at each other, and the Bull Moose Special shooting at everybody. And guess whose side the government ended up being on? It wasn't ours. And the government has never really been on the side in our history, as I can find, when we go on strike. If you don't believe that, look at the strike at Pittston. The first thing they did, they go get injunctions. The federal judges on whose side? On Pittston's side. The state police was on whose side? How many of you went to Pittston by a show of hands in here? How many state police did you meet was on your side when you came down there? And the injunctions were all about putting us back to work and all about breaking the strike. So nothing changed in hundreds and hundreds of years. But they could declare martial law. And you know what they did? They started having hearings right outside in the open. And they said, we saw you on the picket line. Send him not to jail. They sent him to penitentiary. And that was it. Trials right there. And they locked Mother Jones up under house arrest in Pratt, West Virginia. And she almost died there. She got pneumonia. And there's a picture of that house in the museum here, by the way. Pratt, West Virginia. And the governorship changed from a governor called Glasgow to one that was called Hatfield. And yes, he was a descendant of Devil Anse Hatfield. He was a doctor. He goes up Cabin Creek and he sees Paint Creek, he sees Mother Jones sick. And he orders her to be taken care of and sent to a hospital, probably saved her life. That strike was broken because of martial law. The miners on Paint Creek got to keep their union. The miners on Cabin Creek, they did get union recognition, but nothing else out of it. So they had to deal at the company store. They had to live in the company house. We're virtually still slaves, right? So what else were they fighting over in those days? I was looking at the statistic. How many miners do you think died in the United States of America in 1907? It was over, I think it was over 3,000 miners that killed in the coal mines in the United States of America in 1907. Now, you're striking also to stay alive, right? You're just about as well off getting shot at out there on the picket line as you were working in one of these coal mines. So, what happens next? The miners at Paint Creek and Cabin Creek are back to work. The next thing that happens is Ludlow. The workers at Ludlow, they go on strike, coal and iron police. Then you've got Mother Jones showing up in Ludlow, Colorado in 1914, and the Baldwin Guards showing up in 1914, and they created an armored car like the Bull Moose Special. They're shooting at everybody there. Now you've got the miners on strike. They're homeless, and they're jobless. But that's not good enough for these folks on the other side. They decide to shoot this colony up. They put a machine gun up on the hill, and they fire right into this tent colony with the miners and their families there. The miners knew that was going to happen, so they dug pits to where they could get down in the pits and not be shot as the bullets flew. How would you like to be on strike and bullets flying through by your kids and by your family and grandma and grandpa and everybody getting shot at? And just by sport, and this is the government doing this, okay? So that wasn't good enough for them. That wasn't enough fun. So they go walking off that hill after shooting the colony up and carrying kerosene. They dumped kerosene all over these tents and they set them on fire and they burned 13 women and children alive in 1914. And that's when Mother Jones made the quote that I mentioned over at the cemetery about, sure you lost because they have bayonets and all you guys the Constitution. And every time there's a conflict of that type, the bayonets will win every single time, right? So she said, don't make any difference. You still got to fight. If you don't fight, you don't stand up, your things will never change. You'll have to accept what comes your way. Then the next thing that switches off is the Mayborn Massacre in 1920. When Sid Hatfield and Ned Chambers shot those guards that had been used at Paint Creek, Cabin Creek, and Ludlow dead right in the street. And I was watching that movie for the first time in the theater. And how many of you have seen that movie, Mayborn? Now, do you remember at the end when the Baldwin Vest thug is trying to get away? He was downtown when he got shot at. He's running. And this woman on the other side that ran the boarding house and got the shotgun holding it like this. There's a woman behind me in the theater said, shoot that son of a bitch. And I'm thinking, well, he didn't hear you. But she got inspired by that. And guess what? She did. What happened to Sid Hatfield, Ned Chambers, and everybody involved in that? Nothing. Because the Union controlled Mayborn. There was a trial, all right, and there's an African-American on that trial, on that jury. You know what he said? He looked out the window and he said, you see that tree out there? It's going to turn again. And it's going to turn again before I vote to convict Sid Hatfield. The jury found Sid Hatfield, Ned Chambers, innocent, and all the others involved in that. Because as their theory was, the thugs had it coming. That's not exactly law, but that's the way they based their decision. But the next thing that happened, they'd have filled in chambers of murder on the courthouse steps in West Virginia. And that created what? The biggest uprising in the history of this nation, the biggest armed uprising by coal miners and anybody else in the United States of America when they marched on Blair Mountain. 10,000 armed UMWA members said, we've had it up to here. We're going to go to Logan County and hang the sheriff by a sour apple tree, and they said that. And then we're going on over into Mingo County, and we're going to liberate every one of those miners being held in the jails over because they want to join the Union. But the United States Army was called in. Mother Jones showed up there, by the way, and she tried to stop those miners from marching. Miners got mad at her over that, by the way. But I think she was afraid that they was all going to get massacred. But that ended in a stalemate because our people did not want to fight the United States Army. By the way, that was the first time an airstrike has ever been called within the continental borders of the United States. They dropped bombs on the striking miners going up that mountain at Matewan. On top of the mountain was 400 or 500 deputy sheriffs with machine guns shooting down at it. So when we come in here today, and we've had some struggles within the last 50 years here, but we have not had struggles like that. So when I say the blood of Mother Jones is running through our veins, I believe it's the willingness to stand up when we've had enough and fight. And I think we've demonstrated that here since Pittston. 4,000 people were arrested at Pittston. I was in 5 jails in 24 hours. Nobody wanted me. I guess I needed a shower or something. I couldn't figure that out. They going to lock me up. Get move him somewhere else. Don't want him in our jail because nobody wanted them demonstrations around their jails. The fact of the matter. I want to tell y'all something. If enough working people stand together for a common purpose, there is absolutely nothing we can't do. When they said we couldn't win a strike at Pittston, we did. When they said you couldn't beat the marshals, you couldn't beat the sheriffs, you couldn't beat the state police, you couldn't beat the governor, you couldn't beat the injunctions, you couldn't beat the state judge, the federal judge, but we did. And we kept our pensions and our health care. If we'd have lost that strike, we'd have lost them right there on that day. And then when they said, you can't do anything about a bankruptcy, I said, well, we may not be able to, but I believe in the power of prayer here for one thing. I said, I believe that if enough people surround Peabody's headquarters on a regular basis, something's going to change here. And Peabody, after about 10 months of this, says, look, we'll give you some money if you just go away. Don't you come back. Here's some money. I'm going to tell you, that's a fact. And they said, I'll tell you what, after agreeing to give us $300 or $400 million, they said, I'll tell you what we'll do. If you get those 6 coal miners that's been standing out there every day, from Illinois, by the way, if you just get them out of here this evening, we got a couple million more dollars for you. I said, they'll be gone by dark. So, don't let anybody tell you you can't do something about somebody or something. If working class people vote in unison, then nobody can get elected but the people we want, but we don't do that. If we stand together, we can beat any corporation. We can keep our health care. We can keep our pensions. We can have a decent lifestyle. And there's one thing I bet Mother Jones would tell us, that she could walk up here right now and tell us to do something. What do you think it might be? I believe she'd say, you've got to get out this door, and we should all be an organizer. Sometimes people look at me and say, what are you going to do about that coal mine down there? I said, well, what are we going to do about that coal mine down there? Is what I believe we ought to be saying. Because that's how we organized folks in the 20s and in the 30s. We didn't pay some organizer to knock on a door or go on a computer. Somebody and a group of somebodies got together and did this and used the power of our collective solidarity and our collective unity to make the changes we want. What would Mother Jones tell you to do? Don't mourn, organize. Don't mourn, organize. organize, is what she would tell us. And she'd tell all of you, not just me, but all of you, you be an organizer too. And you go out here and you tell people who might be working at one of these non-union mines, a non-union factory, maybe they are working for the state or the federal government or anybody that works ought to be in a union. Anybody that works ought to be in a union. That's what they ought to be about. And you should be like Peter and Paul and the disciples. You should be telling them the same thing. There was only 12 organizers that Jesus had. And look what he did. What should you be doing if Mother Jones was here? She'd say, go out and tell these people something. Go out and tell them you want higher wages, you should do what? Join a union. If you want health care, you should join a union. If you want a pension, you should do. Oh, come on now. You let Mother Jones hear you over on the cemetery. You should join a union. If you want a safer place to work, what should you do? If you want a healthier place to work, you should. If you want to have a voice at work, you should. If you want to protect your Social Security, you should. If you want to protect your Medicare, you ought to. If you want equal pay for women, you should. If you want more freedom in America, you should.